Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and this is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD tonight. As you know, this is a webinar where we're going to discuss Lyme disease. I look forward to seeing what you have in store for me tonight. Sometimes we get into a theme of the evening, not by any planning on my part, but your questions all line up in the same area. So we'll have to see if that's what happens again this evening or not. For those of you that are new, welcome. There's actually a couple of ways that you can participate. One is to listen to the questions as I read them, and you'll be able to actually read them if you're in the live version on your screen too, but listen to those questions and then see what responses I give. There's a lot of good information I give out that way. Another way that you could go ahead and do this is to, let me see here. Oh, okay. Sorry, my screen was flashing there for a minute. The other way to participate is to write a question. And the way you do that is there is a chat box on the bottom of your computer on the right-hand side. Actually, even though I'm pointing on my right, it shows up different on yours. So I think your right is over on that side. Anyhow, it's on the right-hand bottom side of your screen. Write your question to me there. The only thing I ask is as you write your question, click the enter key only when you have your whole question complete. That means that you should write it as one long run-on question. Don't try to create a bunch of paragraphs, okay? The reason for that is if you hit enter, it sends a separate question to me, and it gets really difficult to kind of track what's happening with all of those questions from this side of the screen. Okay. All right. And so, yeah. Oh, and I am creating a recording of tonight's webinar as well. And so you'll be able to see, I'll send out an email to you first thing in the morning, somewhere between 9:30 a.m. Seattle time, with information about that it's done, that I've edited up the recording. And also in that email will be a link to where you can see the video and also where you can sign up for the next webinar. So tonight is the first of 3 webinars that I'm doing in January. And so next week we'll do the second one, and the week after that we'll do the third one. So if you're getting information out of here you find helpful, feel free to keep showing up to these as well too. Okay. All right. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. Hello, Tim. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Happy New Year. How are you doing? Thank you. And Happy New Year to you too. I'm doing well. Thank you. Let's see, I was wondering if it's preferred to treat Candida or yeast during or after Lyme Bartonella treatment. I'm already in the middle of a Lyme Bartonella treatment, and I'm not sure if I should finish it first before starting to treat for Candida. I'm worried it'll be too many medications for my body. Thank you so much. So generally, so let me talk about when to treat Candida. So everyone, when Tim's talking about Candida or yeast, he's talking about, or what we talk about is too many yeast living in your intestines, not in your bloodstream, not systemic yeast, but yeast living in your intestines. Now, if you get too many yeast living in your intestines, they give you systemic effects, but where they live and where they grow too much is in the intestines, okay? So the thing about yeast, if you get too many yeast in the intestines, they trigger an immune reaction that releases a bunch of inflammatory cytokines. Many of you may be familiar with that word cytokines because it was talked a lot about in COVID, but I also talk a lot about cytokines here in my webinars as well too. So let me talk about cytokines real quick so you understand why we focus on yeast, okay? So cytokines are chemicals that are made by white blood cells when they see an infection or they see a toxin. So they're made when white blood cells see mold toxins in you, or they see COVID in you, or they see Lyme in you, or they see too many yeast in your intestines. And they're good, in some ways they're good, and they can be bad, okay? So in a good way, what's good about them is in the right amount, they help turn the immune system on to deal with the toxin or the infection. Notice I said the right amount, okay? And then they also help recruit more white blood cells to where the infection or the problem is, and they help more white blood cells to be made, okay? So that's why they're good. They're actually good. We need them to be made. But the problem is in certain conditions like mold toxicity and in Lyme disease and in too many yeast living in your intestines, the immune system often doesn't do a good job of getting rid of these problems, and it reacts by making more and more cytokines to try to get them under control. And excess cytokines are what cause you problems. So too many cytokines disturb your sleep centers, so you have a hard time sleeping. They give you brain fog, so you have confusion and you can't think straight. They cause fatigue. They make it so your mitochondria energy factories don't work correct. They interfere with the brain regulation centers for all your hormonal systems, so you get thyroid and adrenal dysfunction. And they're inflammatory, so they actually give you body pain in your joints and in your muscles as well, too. Essentially, what we call Lyme disease symptoms mostly are excess cytokine symptoms. And therefore, if you get too many yeast in your intestines, they're going to trigger a condition that looks just like Lyme, okay? So generally what I do at the beginning of my treatments, I screen people using a screening questionnaire I have to see if they might have too many yeast living in them. And if they do, if they screen high enough on my yeast screening questionnaire, and I'll show you where that is in a minute, if they score over 140 on my yeast screening questionnaire at the beginning of a treatment, as I start treating them, I'm going to treat for yeast for at least a month. And I might use part of the yeast treatment as something that can help with both Bartonella and with Lyme. Okay, all right, I'll tell you what that is here in a second, all right? So then the other times that I'll treat for yeast is if somebody starts developing in the middle of a treatment obvious symptoms that they have too many yeast growing in their intestines. All right, so think of too many yeast being in the intestines if you're doing better and then all of a sudden you start doing worse. All right, so if too many yeast move in the intestines, they're going to trigger more of these cytokines to be made, which is going to make it look like all of your Lyme disease is worse, but it could be that you've got too many yeast, all right? Other things that make you think about too many yeast are increased sugar cravings. Yeast release toxins that interact with your skin, leading to more problems with skin rashes like eczema rashes, and pimples and acne sometimes will come out a lot more when you have too many yeast in your intestines too. Gassiness and bloating can be a sign of too many yeast. Having sugar and feeling a lot worse afterwards, that's kind of common, something we'll see in yeast. And in females, if you have too many yeast in the intestines, you're often going to have too many yeast in your vagina, so you're going to have vaginal yeast infections as well too, okay? So in the middle of a treatment, if I'm treating somebody and they start having some decline, or if they start having marked sugar cravings, increased gassiness and bloating, increased pimples and acne, lots of eczema, vaginal itching, vaginal discharge, those are situations where I'm also going to treat yeast. And to answer your question, you can treat yeast at the same time you treat your Lyme and the same time you treat your Bartonella. Okay, so let me tell you how you do that. So the way that I like to approach yeast, the primary things I use a combination of nystatin and another prescription medication called fluconazole, also known as diflucan. Nystatin is your weaker anti-yeast agent, but we use it because it helps to make sure that yeast will not learn resistance to the fluconazole. All right, so we use it kind of as a protection in there. The way you use your nystatin is 2 pills twice a day. Nystatin has no systemic toxicities. It stays in the intestine, so it's not getting absorbed into your blood, and it's not going to give you any difficulties that way. Fluconazole, now what's interesting about it is it's your bazooka. All right, it's your stronger medicine. I have people take, as an adult, 200 milligrams one time a day for 30 days, okay? And it's usually, if yeast is active, by around 2 to 3 weeks into that treatment, you're going to start turning around. Sometimes we have to go a second month, okay? Now, for some people, they've treated yeast already, and their yeast have gotten resistance to fluconazole. In that case, my backup is to use another one of the azoles. So fluconazole is in a family called the azoles, fluconazole, azole. All right. The backup I like to use is something called itraconazole, which can be very effective as well too. Okay. So now here's where the Lyme and the Bartonella crossover comes in. So the azoles have some recent research that came out over the last few years out of Johns Hopkins University that shows that they can treat Bartonella. All right. So fluconazole can treat Bartonella. All right. And so I've been using it. I'm finding some good success with it. In fact, I'm building a lot of my treatments around fluconazole to treat Bartonella. And if for some reason people can't do the fluconazole, then I'm going to use itraconazole. Okay. For Lyme, we know the azoles also can treat the cyst form of the Lyme germ. So in terms of Lyme, there's 3 ways that Lyme looks, okay, or three forms that it has. One is a corkscrew looking thing called a spirochete. Probably you've seen pictures of that on the internet. There's another microscopic cyst form of the germ. And then there's a form of the germ that lives inside of cells where it loses all of its covering, and we call that the L form, okay? So that's what the germs look like, all right? In addition, not to confuse things, Lyme has a growing state, and Lyme has something called a persister state, or we call those persisters, all right? So about 90% of the germs, according to lab experiments, are in a growing phase, and about 10% go into hibernation. They slow their metabolism way down, and they start ignoring regular antibiotics that we use, and we call those persisters. All right. It's a lot of confusing terms about Lyme here, all right? So what the azoles do in terms of Lyme is they can treat the cyst form of the germ. So our strongest cyst agents, for instance, are tinidazole and flagyl metronidazole, but fluconazole is in the same family. So I use it as a cyst agent as well, too, okay? Now, one more thing that's interesting about fluconazole is I just mentioned Lyme has growing and persister forms. Bartonella also has a growing state and persister state. And according to the Johns Hopkins research, the azoles, of which fluconazole is one of the azoles, not only treat growing, but they treat persister Bartonella too. Now, they didn't do research to see what it does for Lyme persisters, okay? So I don't think it works on Lyme persisters. For Lyme persisters, I think many of you know my go-to that I like using with my treatments is I like using cinnamon, clove, oregano capsules, 1 pill twice a day as my agent to treat Lyme persisters and also Bartonella persisters, okay? So anyhow, to answer your question, you can treat Lyme and Bartonella and yeast all at the same time. You just may need to adjust your treatment to be able to cover all of them, which is build your treatment around fluconazole, okay? And in terms of what else you might do, you could combine your fluconazole along with a clarithromycin or an azithromycin or a doxycycline or a minocycline. Those tetracyclines, which are the minocycline, doxycycline, and clarithromycin, azithromycin, which are your macrolides, are good at treating spirochete Lyme that lives in and Lyme that lives inside of cells. Okay, all right, and the tetracyclines and the macrolides are also good about treating Bartonella, the growing form. Okay, so you can build a treatment that uses a tetracycline or a macrolide along with fluconazole, and you've got a full Lyme treatment. You've got a full Bartonella treatment, and the fluconazole is the cornerstone of a yeast treatment, and you add nystatin into that, and you've got a full treatment, okay? So that's kind of one of the tricks. That's what I do in my practice with that, all right? All right. So let me do a quick screen share here for you. I want to show you some information where you can find more about this too. All right, so this is my Lyme disease information site. In terms of diagnosing yeast, take a look at this article here, A Silent Problem, Is It Yeast? And I talk about how do you diagnose Lyme or yeast at the beginning using my questionnaire, but I also describe what symptoms you look for later in treatment to figure out if yeast is present, okay? Here is my yeast screening questionnaire right there, okay? If you fill this out and you score it over 150, that suggests that you have too many yeast, okay? I'm sorry, over 140, I should say. All right. All right. And then in terms of Bartonella, take a look. I just want to show you something about the azoles, the way I built those into the Bartonella article. So take a look at how to treat persister. Well, look at this article called Kills Bartonella. And down here, I go through a list of what I call tier 1 Bartonella treatments. Excuse me. And one of the tier 1s is to use fluconazole plus azithromycin or clarithromycin. Okay, so there it is. I just built it in right there for you. Okay, all right. All right, everyone. So I'm sorry. I mean, you may hear me cough tonight. I actually had one of the viruses that's out, one of the respiratory viruses that's out there a few weeks ago, and I'm still having all this bronchial stuff going on, although it's gradually getting better. But from what I'm understanding from a number of my friends that have gotten this too, it just takes time to kind of clear this stuff up. So you may hear me cough tonight. It is not active COVID, and nor was it active COVID 3 weeks ago. My testing came back negative on that. So anyhow, there you go. Thanks, Tim. Good luck to you. Hello, David. Happy New Year's, Dr. Ross. Happy New Year's to you, too. What supplements, foods do you recommend to lower body inflammation? Is curcumin one of them? Thank you. So in terms of lowering inflammation related to Lyme, co-infections, mold toxicity, and too many yeast, you want to take something that's going to lower cytokines. All right, curcumin, which is a component of the seasoning turmeric, gets inside of white blood cells and blocks the production line for cytokines, okay? So curcumin can be quite effective. If you're going to do curcumin, the better forms usually are going to be liposomal, meaning they're microscopically wrapped in fat to increase absorption. 500 milligrams 3 times a day. The product I like for that is a Thorne product that used to be called Mariva 500. They've rebranded it. They now call it Curcumin Phytosome, and it still uses this product called Mariva in it. So it's the same stuff, basically, all right? All right. The other option would be to look at using a combination of herbs together that lower cytokines. And one of those combinations, for instance, is a product made by Researched Nutritionals called Cytoquel. It's got some quercetin, curcumin in it, some green tea extract in it. It's got a couple other things in it too, but a combination of herbs that work to lower cytokines. And if I were to do that, I'd do a couple pills twice a day, or 1 pill 3 times a day on that one is generally what I do. Now, keep in mind curcumin, although, it comes from turmeric. It is the active part of turmeric. It is actually horribly absorbed in our diet. So you cannot take enough in your diet to be able to get cytokines under control. It's just not that well absorbed. Okay. All right. So anyhow, there you go. That is what I recommend. Either curcumin or that product called Cytoquel, that's Cytoquel. Here, let me just do a quick screen share here for you. All right, so if you're ever wondering what products I recommend, or if you're looking where to buy products, take a look here. This is my supplement store called Marty Ross MD Supplements. So if I mention curcumin and you're wondering which curcumin product do I recommend, you can take a look here, just write curcumin in. And you're going to see there is what Thorne now is calling Curcumin Phytosome. Researched Nutritionals has a product called Curcumin Pure. And I should have Cytoquel up here too. I guess I forgot to fill out the Cytoquel so it picks up correctly. But let's look at Cytoquel. Cytoquel is another option too. This is the Cytoquel, and let me just double check the ingredients on this. Yeah, so I see why. So they're using a turmeric extract, which is curcumin in here. Okay, all right. Oh, one other thing I want to warn everyone about. If you are buying Researched Nutritionals products from my store, or you're buying them somewhere else, one thing you're going to start seeing is that Researched Nutritionals is rebranding. They're creating a new label. What I want to assure everyone is there is no difference in the ingredients. So if you suddenly get a new label with a product with a new looking label, it is the same exact stuff as before. They've just made it prettier. Okay, that's all. That's all they've done. There's no change in the ingredients in any of those products. Okay, all right. It's going to be a slow phase, and they tell us it's going to be over time. You'll start seeing those labels show up, especially when from me or wherever you're getting your products from. Hello, Lynn. Hi, Dr. Ross. I've been told I have Th1 dominance, so I'm wondering about different meds that might push the Th1 immune system. A couple weeks ago, you said BPC decreases Th2, Th17, so consequently raises Th1. What about KPV? Would either of these meds be problematic for someone who is Th1 dominant? And what about LDN for someone who is Th1 dominant? All right, so It's a good question. So first of all, I would wonder how you know you're Th1 dominant, because most people actually are Th2, Th17 dominant. So I would caution you to make sure that go back and check with your physician to make sure that's what they said, or did they say you were Th2, Th17 dominant? All right. So KPV, which is a peptide, and BPC 157 are going to work to suppress the Th2, Th17, which is going to therefore lead to decreased cytokines coming there that suppress Th1. Okay, so you are correct that they're going to lead to increased Th1. On the other hand, another way to regulate Th1 is to take something that modulates what are known as T regulatory cells. So let me stand back here. Let me kind of start talking terms. So Th1 is a part of the immune system that is the cells that actually attack a known germ. All right, these are your T cells that will go on and kill Lyme because the body knows Lyme is in it. Will kill the cold virus you have. Will kill bacteria. Okay, these are your fight the germ cells, basically attack it and kill it germs. Okay, or cells. Okay, all right. Th2 and Th17, I put them collectively together. They're kind of the defensive team, if you will, versus Th1 is the offensive team. Th2 is made up of mast cells, which are your allergy cells that make histamines. They're made up of a type of white blood cells called B cells that make antibodies that circulate, trying to give you constant protection from germs. Th17 is made up of, Th2 is made up of a bunch of autoimmune cells as well, too. Th17 is made up of defenders that sit right under your skin and your mucous membranes, and they can catch germs that break through the barriers. And they don't have to even know what the germ is. They're just made to defend against anything that comes through. Okay. All right. So what regulates Th1, Th2, Th17 is something called a T regulatory cell, or a Treg. And think of Tregs as the parent in the room that try to keep these arguing kids in balance. All right. All right. So low dose naltrexone works by helping to increase T regulatory cells. And if you have more T regulatory cells, you can get a rebalancing of the Th1 versus Th2, Th17. All right. All right. The other thing to look at doing is to work with a peptide called thymosin alpha 1 that was pulled off the market by the FDA, unfortunately. So thymosin alpha 1 modulates the immune system to make the right amount of different kinds of white blood cells, Tregs, Th1, Th2, Th17. Okay. Now, as I said, thymosin alpha 1, the FDA stepped in and told compounding pharmacies they can't make it anymore. Part of that came about because there were people making claims that thymosin alpha 1 can cure COVID. All right. So the FDA said we can't stand for that and shut that all down. All right. So, but there is a integrative peptides product called Thymogen Alpha 1 that is made up of two peptides that are called bioregular peptides that can modulate, should modulate, likely modulate, intend to modulate the immune system in a similar way to the thymosin alpha 1. And so Integrative Peptides came up with this product to kind of be the alternative to thymosin alpha 1. They claim to have studies showing that it works as well as a thymosin alpha 1. I haven't seen those studies. I'm just talking about what they claim. But the mechanisms by which these work should replicate the effect of a thymosin alpha 1. And a thymosin alpha 1, again, leads to correct levels of T regulatory cells, T2, Th2, Th17, and Th1, okay? So it modulates all of these, okay? So some things for you to think about. The integrated peptides product called Thymogen Alpha 1, and I'm having people take one pill twice a day on that. The other one would be to use low-dose naltrexone. That's an alternative as well, too. All right. So everyone, low-dose naltrexone, let me talk about that real quick. So low-dose naltrexone is not a peptide, all right? KPV is a peptide, and BPC 157 is a peptide, and Thymogen Alpha 1, this product by Integrative Peptides, is a peptide, okay, but low-dose naltrexone is not. So low-dose naltrexone is a narcotic blocker. That's what it was manufactured for. That's what it was developed for. It was designed to help people with narcotic overdoses. And at full dose, what it does is it binds to narcotic and endorphin receptors in our bodies and bumps narcotics off of those receptors, freeing you from being overdosed on those drugs, okay? But the other thing that endorphins, so our body has a natural narcotic system called endorphins. And the endorphins we make can help regulate our pain, but they regulate the immune system too. And if you block endorphin receptors for a short period of time by using small amounts of naltrexone, that's what we call low-dose naltrexone, small amounts, then what happens is these receptors will be bound up by the low-dose naltrexone for about 4 to 6 hours. And during that time, the brain hates this. The brain says, uh-oh, and the brain starts sending out a bunch of signals to the endorphin-producing cells in the body, telling them to make more endorphins. So they do, okay? And those endorphin receptors become super sensitive to any endorphins that are swimming around. So at 6 hours, when the naltrexone wears off of these receptors are super sensitive to endorphins, and they get flooded with excess endorphins. And one of the things that can do is lead to better functioning and more T regulatory cells. Okay, all right. So that's one of the ways that it works. The other ways that naltrexone can work is it binds to an immune cell in the brain called microglia, and bound to microglia at what's called a toll receptor in microglia, it can help decrease fibromyalgia pain and neurologic pain. Okay, and then finally, mast cells. So if you're somebody that has a problem with your mast cells being overactivated, you're over allergic in a sense, mast cell activation syndrome, mast cells have a toll receptor too. And so if you give more endorphins to those toll receptors, it can turn down your mast cell activation as well. All right. So use low dose naltrexone to regulate autoimmune disorders, to cause more T regulatory cells to be made so you can get better balance in your Th1, Th17, Th2, and then also can help with myalgia and neurologic pains, and then finally can be a part of mast cell activation syndrome treatment as well too. Okay, I'll show you an article that you can read about naltrexone. I'll also show you an article you can read further about the oral peptides that are available right now too. So let me do a quick screen share here. All right, so the peptides article, where I think it's in Repair and Restore. All right, so this is my article. It's called Key Oral Peptide Strategies to Repair and Restore in Lyme and Mold Toxicity. I recently updated this on December 17th. And part of the update I did was to coincide with some changes that I made for my book that's getting ready to be published. This article is going to be partly in the book. And in here, I clarify information about the thymosin alpha 1 and how this product called Thymogen Alpha 1 is intended to do what thymosin alpha 1 does. Okay. I also, as I updated it, I went through each of the peptides and gave some further clarification about what they can do. Part of the reason I updated this article is I just completed a second round of certification training in peptides. And so I wanted what I wrote here in this article to better reflect that. Okay. All right. So this is about oral peptides. I've chosen to stay away from IV peptides in this article because they're harder to get. And it's not clear from a regulatory standpoint what FDA is going to ultimately do with peptides. And I address that here in this article as well too. Okay. All right, and then let's see what else. Oh, naltrexone. So take a look in my immune system chapter. And here's my article about naltrexone where I talk about what it does, but also how do you use it, okay? And it is a prescription. You have to have a physician or a clinician that will write a prescription for this and send it off to a compounding pharmacy. All right, there you go. Thanks for your question, Lynn. Good luck to you. Hello, Debbie. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. I have two questions. I have a long history of Lyme, Babesia, and Bartonella, but only rare positive tests and activated viruses. My labs for the last 2 years have shown low white blood cell, low lymphs, and other indications of ongoing infection, and I feel sick enough to match that. Recent IGenex Immunoblot showed nothing. My doctor wants expensive Infectolab testing, but I'm skeptical it will give us the guidance he would like. What are your thoughts? Number two, another doctor has started me on the AIP elimination diet, thinks there is no point in treating infections while my immune system is such a mess. He thinks I need to build up my immune system, reduce autoimmunities, etc., which could take quite a while, and not take antibiotics or antivirals until I'm stronger, even while some sort of infections appear to be active. Does that sound reasonable to you? All right. Let me try to give you my input on both of those, okay? So one of the problems that can happen with Lyme disease is that when Lyme is active and the co-infections are active, they can sometimes suppress the immune system and the immune reaction, okay? So the Immunoblot by IGenex and the Elispot T-cell activation test that is done by Infectolab are basically different ways of looking to see, is your immune system reacting against the germ? All right. So in the case of an Immunoblot, what IGenex is doing is they're looking to see, does your immune system make antibodies that attach to proteins found on 8 different kinds of Lyme germs? All right. And one of the problems can be is if Lyme is very active, your immune system may be so suppressed that you're not making enough antibodies to be measured. All right. But the benefit of that Immunoblot is they're at least looking to see if you have antibodies against 8 kinds of Lyme. All right. Now, the Infectolab test, the last time I looked at it, they are doing what the Infectolab does is they're using a test technique called a T-cell activation test, which is also known as an Elispot test. So what is done in a T-cell activation, remember T-cells are what fight infections, is you draw somebody's blood, you take their T-cells, you put them in a test tube, and then you add some proteins from the germ you're testing for, so Lyme proteins or Bartonella proteins, into the test tube, and then you measure, do these T-cells that are in there make certain types of cytokines, all right? All right, so they're just looking to see, are they making the cytokines, okay? So the problem here again is with the Infectolab test, there's a couple problems. Number one, if you've got severe immune suppression going on, your T cells may not be activated. They just may not turn on to this stuff, okay? So that can miss it. The other thing that's really limited about Infectolab, though, is I believe they're only testing for 1, maybe 2 strains of Lyme. They're not doing testing for the whole range of Lyme that is found in this country right now. So it misses a large number of that as well, too. So, on the other hand, if it does come back positive, it does say that, yeah, you probably got Lyme in you, okay? But if it's negative, it doesn't exclude having Lyme. And in some ways, I think it is less effective at finding if Lyme is in there than, in my experience, than the Immunoblot test, okay? All right. In terms of this idea that some doctors have that you need to fix the immune system first before you can treat Lyme. In general, that's not true. In general, okay? In fact, if we look at, there's some study, that's been my experience, all right? And also, if we look at some studies that were done by a group called MyLyme Data, which is a research arm of the group called LymeDisease.org. So MyLyme Data, as of middle of last year, had about 16,000 people enrolled. So people that have Lyme fill out this big questionnaire for MyLyme Data, and they sit in MyLyme's data bank, okay? And periodically then, MyLyme Data will go out and choose a large number of people from their database and send them secondary questionnaires to research certain questions. So I think a few years ago, 4 or 5, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, they sent out a questionnaire asking people, what is it that worked? What got you well? And overwhelmingly, the majority of people that got well were the ones that used antibiotics, and they treated their germs, okay? Now, there are rare occasions in my practice that if I've got somebody that we've used antibiotics on, and every time we do something with antibiotics, they get worse, or they're a person that's having a lot of reactivity to everything. In those situations, I might step back and try to modulate the immune system first before I start going into germ killing again. All right. And I can't tell enough from what you wrote here as to whether that's your situation or not. Okay. So that's kind of how I approach it. All right. All right. Good luck to you, Debbie. So let me just do a screen share here for you. So I've got it in my new book, everyone. I mentioned it tonight, is going to be in the next week or two. It comes out. I'm having some problems with the printing press, but it's in a done form. I'm just waiting to get some printing problems corrected. And right now I'm waiting to review the latest proof copy of that. Okay. But one of the things that I have done in that book, one of the beginning part of the book is looking at key information you have before you treat, information you should know before you treat, okay? And so trying to figure out, where do I have that? Here. So this article, this is one of the articles, it's the foundation, and I have cleaned it up. It reads better in the book. I eventually will put what's in the book here, but basically most of the information that's in the book is here. This talks about what is the most successful thing that's going to help you get over Lyme, okay? And this builds on the studies that were done by my Lyme data. And so what they found is that people that got well, 76% of them were people that used antibiotics, okay? All right, so antibiotics are an important thing. Now, I would tell you that in their questionnaire, they didn't differentiate. They were mainly talking about prescription antibiotics. They didn't specifically query people to see if herbal antibiotics got them well or not. What I say in my practice, I think herbal antibiotics can do a good job too. So my interpretation of this data is based on that as well too. Okay. All right. Or how I use that data, I throw herbal antibiotics into the antibiotic group as well. Okay. All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Mary. Hi, Dr. Ross. Thanks again for taking my question. Is it more difficult to treat Lyme and co-infections if you have an overgrowth of yeast? So just quickly, Mary, I talked about that earlier tonight. It isn't that it's going to make it more difficult to treat. Well, it could. Remember, the Lyme symptoms you have mainly are excess cytokine symptoms. If you have something else that's triggering excess cytokines, it's going to make you feel worse. All right. The other thing is, if you have excess cytokines already, it's going to make you have it so you have even stronger Herxheimer reactions, because in a Herxheimer reaction, as you start killing germs, your immune system makes even more cytokines, all right? So my approach is to try to knock the yeast down, because it's going to lower your cytokine load and you're going to feel better. Secondly, too many cytokines can suppress the immune system too, okay? So I want to lower the yeast to get the immune system working better as well too. Will you get better if you don't treat the yeast? It's possible, but you're probably going to feel worse doing it, and it may take longer because of the immune suppression issue. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Mary. Hello, Karen. Hold on here just a minute. How do you feel about SOT therapy for bacterial and viral infections? Is it effective? I don't care for it. I think it verges on being fraudulent treatment, to be quite honest with you. But let me just tell you why I'm saying that. So SOT, everyone, stands for supportive oligonucleotide therapy. All right. And so nucleotides are the building blocks of DNA and RNA. All right. So your genetic material in your cell is called DNA. That holds all the blueprint for everything in your body. That blueprint has to be interpreted and used to tell the cell to do certain things. So that DNA is copied into something called RNA in the center of your cell. And then the RNA goes out into the middle of the cell, not the center, but the other part of the cell. And it combines itself with something called a ribosome. Ribosomes are where proteins are manufactured. So think of ribosomes as your protein production plants, all right? And RNA is the blueprint that comes from the DNA. It carries that blueprint out to the ribosome, and it tells the ribosome, here's the protein you're going to make, all right? Okay, so what SOT does is it uses a bunch of what are known as blocking nucleotides to make it so that that RNA cannot be interpreted correctly in the ribosome, making it so that certain key proteins are not made when somebody has Lyme. And specifically, it's supposed to block the production of proteins that are needed to replicate the germ. Okay, so these blocking nucleotides will attach themselves to the RNA, blocking it being read within the ribosome. Another option of which it could work is it may slice up the RNA. All right. Now, the company that is making these nucleotides is a company in Greece called RGCC. And they haven't done any studies to show their treatment works. There's no publication, no published papers. There is no papers that they can provide me. They say they're doing research, but they haven't published anything to show that it works. There's a number of reasons to think it would not work, all right? And let me go through why it likely will not work. Number one, if you're going to inject these nucleotides, this genetic material, into somebody's blood, you need to get it absorbed into the cell. That's a hard thing to do. Part of the problem is out in the blood, there's tons of enzymes that are there ready to just devour these oligonucleotides, okay? All right. And so it's not clear if they've developed a method to get it inside the cells. And again, they haven't shared any research with any of us to tell us that they actually get inside the cells. All right. Now, the other thing is these things are not stable. Think of the RNA vaccines that we have had during COVID. That's nucleotide material that people are being injected with. All right. And especially when these first came out, think of the initial Pfizer, these things had to be refrigerated in super sub-zero temperatures to be stable. And even the other vaccine, it still has to be refrigerated very tightly. It's not clear how adequate this stuff is getting shipped from RGC into America, if it's even being stable by the time it gets here, basically. Okay, all right. There's one other problem with RGC. So anyhow, they're not sharing with us exactly what's being blocked. They won't tell us. I mean, I've written to them and said, which part of the RNA apparatus are you blocking? They won't tell us. They won't tell me for sure which of the ways that an RNA blocking oligonucleotide can work that they use. They call it proprietary, and they won't tell us about it. They can't share any information with me that proves the stuff gets inside the cells. All right. But here's a bigger problem. They claim to be designing which nucleotide sequences to give you based on the actual germs in you. And the way that they're doing it is they have the providers send them blood, and then they're doing a type of test on your blood called PCR testing. PCR testing is a way to amplify the DNA of the germ so that you can read the amount of it, okay? All right. We know with good science and Lyme PCR testing that it will only find Lyme if it's in you 30% of the time. All right. No one's done the actual studies on Bartonella to know how effective PCR testing is, but Bartonella doesn't readily live in the blood. It lives inside your cells, and they're sending them whole blood. They're not sending them your cells. So it's probable they're missing a lot of the Bartonella as well, too. Now, I wrote to them and said, show me your proof that your test even works. And they eventually, it took a number of times of going back and forth to get them to send me information. But they then said maybe it works up to 60% of the time. Their test is effective 60% of the time. But then when I asked them to send me the proof of that claim, they didn't send me anything. Because I told them the science clearly shows that Lyme testing, PCR testing will only find Lyme if it's in you 30% of the time. So how can you be claiming 60% success with your ability to test, all right? So what are they sending people, right? So if they're taking your blood and they're testing it and they say they find something using a test for Lyme that we know only finds it 30% of the time, and for your other germs probably isn't even that good either, what the heck are they sending you, all right? So I'm skeptical. I'm very, very skeptical. Now, I acknowledge there's people that say they got benefit from it. But I would point out that if we take a look at any prescription medicine that has to get approval from the Food and Drug Administration, any one of those has what's known as a placebo effect of about 30 to 40%, or an average of 35%, all right? So in those kind of studies, what you do is you give a group of people a drug, and you give another group of people a sugar pill, a placebo. And in the studies, these people don't know who got what, all right, because they're blinded. You don't want to have biases, okay? And what they found is the people in the sugar pill, about 35% of them had the same benefit that people that took the real drug. So just the fact that you're taking something that you think might work gets you better. That's called a placebo effect. Now, I think a placebo effect is wonderful. I mean, I think it's a great way to heal. I think there's something to it. But gosh, what the heck? I mean, that's a lot of money you're going to be paying for a placebo effect. This stuff is super expensive, all right? All right. Then the last problem I have with SOT, there's no safety studies on it. We know that for SOT that has been approved, there's certain conditions that SOT is approved for, that drug companies have gone to the FDA, they've done their safety studies, they've done their proof of activity studies, and they've gotten it approved. And there's a number that had problems with bad side effects and didn't get approved. But RGCC isn't sharing any of that with us either. All right. So I don't know what this stuff is. I think it's extremely, I think providers doing this are not, I don't think they're being the best physicians, I'll put it that way. And I would need to see, now I may be proven wrong, but in how I build my treatments, I want to have some scientific foundation before I put something in somebody. And here there is none at all. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Karen. Let's see, Karen, if you want to read more detail what I just wrote here, you can take a look at my SOT article here. My SOT article is also going to be included in my new Lyme book as well, too, everyone. Excuse me. All right. So I in this article, I talk about various ways SOT could work. Again, RGCC is not telling us for sure the actual mechanism theirs works, but I've walked through a number of ways they could be working. And I lay out why I think it's problematic getting the stuff in the cells. And in this article, I talk about their testing technique can't be any good, even though they rely on it to identify which nucleotide sequences to send you. Okay. All right. Hello, TJ. Is there anything that you can recommend for shingles flares topically or orally? I get these on occasion ever since my tick bite. Thanks. No, the only thing that I'd suggest I don't have a natural way. All right. Yeah. Now, there really isn't a natural way that I am aware of at preventing these. The way to treat for an acute outbreak is actually to take medicines like acyclovir and Valtrex. Those can be given at high doses to shorten the duration of a shingles. But beyond that, I don't have other ways to manage it, unfortunately. All right. Good luck to you, TJ. Hello, Brandy. Let's see. Can Lyme or Bart cause very itchy welts to pop up periodically? And is there anything I can put on them to help relieve the itch? It's quite intense, easily along the lines of poison ivy. All right. So there is a condition that Lyme and Bartonella can trigger, which is called mast cell activation syndrome. So your mast cells are a type of cell, an immune system cell, and they're the cells where histamines are made. Historically, physicians were taught that mast cells are the cells that are involved in allergies, and that if you're allergic to something like cat dander or pollens in the air or food, if parts of those land on a mast cell, the mast cells then would release their histamines, leading to histamine type reactions like runny nose, itchy eyes, welts of like you're describing, itchiness of the skin. All right. So we used to think historically that it was only things you're excuse me just a minute here. That it was only things that you're allergic to that could that do that. However, there's research that has come out showing that other things turn on your mast cells and cause them to be more easily reactive to the things in the world around you. And those other things are mold toxicity, yeast, intestinal yeast overgrowth, and infections like Lyme, Bartonella, and Babesia. Okay, so yeah, they can turn it on. One of your biggest causes of mast cell activation actually is stress. Right? The number one thing you can regulate and affect if you have mast cell activation is to lower stress or do things to lower stress in your life. The other things you should do is obviously get rid of your sources. So if you have infections, get rid of those. You have mold toxicity around you, get rid of that. Other things you could do are to take medicines that stabilize your mast cells. And so those would be things, herbs that stabilize your mast cells would be something called quercetin or luteolin can be used to stabilize mast cells. You take them regularly, not when you have an outbreak, but you take them all the time. You can use antihistamines like Benadryl or Claritin. Some of the stomach acid blockers also block histamine receptors, so things like Tagamet and cimetidine can sometimes be helpful. But those are the big things. Let me show you an article that you can take a look at to get more information about this, okay? All right, so this is my article called Mast Cell Activation Syndrome in Lyme. It also is going to be included in my new book, a cleaned up version here. So my new book, even though it includes articles from here, I've cleaned them up. They're a bit more readable. I hired an editor to help me look at some of this too. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about getting the new book. Anyhow, in here I talk about things that turn on your mast cells. I talk about the symptoms you can get with mast cell activation. I talk about testing. And then I talk about how do you deal with it. You decrease stress, you remove the things you're allergic to, treat your infections, remove toxins, lower cytokines, block histamines, and stabilize your mast cells. Okay, so I talk about that here. The other thing is to do a low histamine diet as well too. Okay, all right. Uh-oh. I may be losing the battle tonight here. Just a minute, everyone. The more I've been talking, the worse my itchiness back there is getting worse. But anyhow, let's see. Well, I hope I can keep doing the rest of the time, but we'll see. Hello, LG. Hi, Dr. Ross. Let's see. Thank you for these webinars. I have IgG Bartonella and several questions. Are the symptoms of IgM and IgG Bartonella the same? 2, what are your thoughts on using synthetic estrogen, low estrogen when treating Bartonella? Thank you. All right. So IgM and IgG Bartonella, they're Bartonella infection. They're the same, but let me talk about that a little bit. So when we try to see if you have a Bartonella infection, one of the ways that we can see if you have it is to measure whether you're making antibodies against the germ. And there are two families of antibodies we make, two major families of antibodies we make against infections. One is called IgM and one is called IgG. IgMs are what we make first when we get infected with something, and they are supposed to go away and eventually get replaced by IgG. Once you make IgGs, they are the memory of the immune system, and you'll keep making them to some degree over time, okay? And so finding an IgG does not necessarily mean a germ is in you. It could be your immune system dealt with it. You have to kind of look at what the symptoms tell you, okay? All right. IgM is interesting in that generally we're all taught IgMs are supposed to go away. But we know, for instance, in the Lyme infection, Lyme germ, that around 50% of the time that people have chronic Lyme, they still test positive for IgMs. And we don't have a good explanation why. This is something that was observed in the National Institutes of Health about 20 years ago, conducted a number of studies looking to see if longer-term antibiotics would make a difference for people. And to enroll in their studies, everyone had to take Western blot testing. And so we know, looking at that data, that around 50% of those people tested positive with IgMs. These are people with chronic Lyme. These are people they were enrolled because they already failed previous treatment, and they're still making IgMs, okay? So IgMs can persist in Lyme. More recently, IGenex has updated its Bartonella test. They are now doing a technique called an Immunoblot Bartonella test that also measures antibodies. And they're finding some early data showing that IgMs are also remaining positive in chronically sick people. And we don't know why. All right. But so having an IgM used to always mean it was probably an acute infection. But in the world of Lyme and Bartonella, that may not be so. Okay. All right. In terms of, are the symptoms the same? Yeah. It is basically the same infection. It's just you have different antibody reactions against it. And then what are my thoughts about using estrogen when treating Bartonella? If your question is using estrogen a way to treat or kill Bartonella? No, it's not. But is your question, is this something that you're taking to deal with low estrogen effects, maybe triggered by Bartonella? Then I think that's fine to be on that, okay? All right. Or taking it for another reason. For instance, if you're menopausal and you're having menopause symptoms, then I think low estrogen would be okay. My preference when using estrogen, though, usually is to use non-synthetic, to use estrogens that are identical to the type that are made in humans, actually. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, LG. Hello, Sandra. Thanks for your help, Dr. Ross. You're welcome. Let's see, I have Lyme and have adrenal surges. Doctors aren't sure what's the best beta blocker. Any experience with one beta blocker over another causing fewer side effects than atenolol? Also, I have a hard time taking antibiotics, been on and off of them. Is there one herb you recommend first for Lyme, possibly Bartonella? Many thanks. All right, so I generally don't recommend one herb for Lyme or Bartonella. For Lyme, I recommend taking something called cat's claw and something called atobabark. Together, they work very well. They work about 85 to 90% of the time, in my experience. There's data showing that they can kill both spirochete Lyme and cyst Lyme. They also can remove a slime layer called a biofilm that protects the germ from being attacked by your immune system. And even antibiotics getting in. And so it can be quite effective. The herbs that I like using for Bartonella don't work that well against Lyme. And those herbs are Houttenia and Sitta acuta, and they work fairly well about 70-75% of the time for Bartonella. Now, I find the most benefit using those two herbs, the cat's claw and the otoba for Lyme, and using Cytoquel and Hutania for Bartonella. It is true there is one herb that is kind of a crossover herb that can treat both Lyme and Bartonella, but on its own, I don't find it to be that effective. And that is an herb called Japanese knotweed. There is laboratory evidence that got published within the last year showing it can treat growing and persister Lyme, and it can treat growing and persister Bartonella. But my experience using it as a single agent, it's not going to work that well, okay, for those infections, basically. Yeah, in terms of beta blockers, you know, it's hit or miss. So beta blockers, everyone, block a type of adrenaline, an adrenaline receptor called a beta-1 receptor. And the beta receptors, the drugs that do that can be atenolol, propranolol, toprol. You know, the shortest acting one is propranolol. The mid-range acting one is atenolol. And then a long-range acting one would be the toprol. In some ways, the toprol may be better, especially if you're having frequent episodes. If you get random episodes that, well, anyhow, that's where I would leave that. But it's all hit or miss. You try one and see how it goes for a person. If it doesn't work well enough, then you go to another one. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Sandra. Hello, Ricky. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. How do you know if you are over yeast? Thank you. So there's not a done test. I mean, the thing about intestinal yeast overgrowth is what I think you mean by yeast. Yeast live in our intestines, even in healthy people. And so what we want to do is to get your yeast back to a healthy level. So our goal isn't when we treat yeast in the intestines to wipe it out. It's just to get it back to a level that it is supposed to be at, basically. So we don't have a done test because there's no way of knowing what the right amount is for you. We each have our own right amount, basically, okay? So you have to look at what your symptoms say. So are you still having lots of sugar cravings? Are you still having lots of gassiness and bloating? Do you still have lots of pimple and acne or eczema? Just kind of go through those lists of symptoms I mentioned earlier tonight. And if you still have a lot of them, you may still have yeast going on, okay? Yeah. Good luck to you, Ricky. Hello, Anna. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you. Let's see. I'm currently on a pulse protocol for Babesia and Bartonella on Bactrim, Mepron, azithromycin, nystatin, and recent added methylene blue at 10 milligrams, which I take every other day. This is my third round of 6 weeks. I also take a tiny 2.5 milligram of Cortef for exhaustion and hyperthyroid. My worst symptom is being in the upright position, especially walking and standing too long. I feel like my brain disconnects and I get foggy and disoriented and hands can get shaky. Feeling of weakness or faint feeling. Drunk-like sensation. I have to lay down for this to pass. I also snack on something even though I'm not hungry, or I just ate not too long before this to help this go away. My blood pressures are mostly okay, but can fluctuate and pulse can be around 115. Is this all Babesia and Bartonella or more of an adrenal problem? What you're describing to me sounds to be an adrenaline, anti-adrenaline imbalance, or we call that sympathetic parasympathetic dysfunction, or also it's known as paroxysmal orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, or POTS. Okay, they all mean the same thing. It's an imbalance in your adrenaline and anti-adrenaline levels. The nerve that is supposed to regulate your adrenaline and anti-adrenaline is something called the vagal nerve. In Lyme, the Lyme infection can infect that nerve. Bartonella sometimes can infect it as well too. And Babesia triggers these reactions, although it's not clear exactly what the direct mechanism is, but it can be part of this as well too. So to answer your question, yeah, this all fits with that. The problem I have with your treatment is I don't think pulsing works well for Bartonella babesia. Now, I know there's some providers out there doing it. I know GemSec, for instance, in Washington, D.C. does it. But I can tell you countless people that I've treated that had seen him before, and all I did was to put them on continuous treatment for their continuous treatment for their Bartonella babesia, and they got well. All right. So the issue with Bartonella and babesia is that they have a short growth cycle. So Bartonella, for instance, replicates every 24 hours. And in the period you're off your antibiotics, guess what comes back? Bartonella babesia, okay? An average length of treatment to get somebody well from Bartonella, I find, is 4 to 6 months. That's continuous treatment. An average treatment length for somebody with babesia is about 4 to 5 months, and that's continuous as well, too. I will occasionally pulse my Lyme germ treatment, and that's because Lyme has an extremely long replication cycle. And when you're pulsing, during the period you're off, if you're not off for more than a couple months, or if you're off for anywhere from 4 weeks to 8 weeks, the germ is going to minimally be returning during that time period. But I don't agree with pulsing for babesia and Bartonella. I generally find those treatments not be that effective. And I know GemSec does that, but I just don't do it. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Anna. Hello, Cindy. Let's see. Thanks for any clarity on this. In the past, I have had Lyme, Bartonella henselae, Bartonella cantana, babesia decani, Mycoplasma pneumoniae, and ehrlichiosis. I'm puzzled where the following symptoms might be coming from. Most evenings, several hours before bedtime, I have severe pain and stiffness in the neck and shoulders with severe headache at the base of the skull. Burning pain in my sides just beneath my rib cage, along with lower back pain that makes it impossible to stand for long periods and hard to move. I then feel tightness in my chest, along with difficulty breathing and asthma, and my voice changes tone, warbling like a bleeding sheep. When I go to bed, I have RLS, only full body, with fine motor spasms in both hands and feet. If I get sufficient sleep, most symptoms disappear, to be replaced by overwhelming sensations of vibration throughout my body with low-grade fever. What is the likely cause? Should I be worried? And would an LLMD or different specialist be indicated? So what you're describing, just briefly, you're describing a lot of neurologic and musculoskeletal problems. Obviously, you know that. And when I think of those problems, I'm thinking of Lyme and one of the Bartonellas. Not so much the babesia decani, not the Mycoplasma pneumonia, not the ehrlichiosis. I think it probably would be it would be beneficial if you had somebody that is a Lyme literate clinician that could take a look at you, spend more time asking you questions than I get here with your brief description, and try to help you get at the bottom of it. But I think there's a possibility here of Lyme and or Bartonella. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Cindy. Hold on here a minute, everyone. I got to get some more water here to keep this thing at bay. Just a second here. Let's see. Hi, Flavia. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you, too. Let's see. My son was treating for BART. After some months, he was doing very good until his doctor decided to take him off rifampin and add Malarone on his protocol due to my son's test spots for babesia. After 7 weeks, I started to notice my son getting slower. He started with insomnia, and all his symptoms came back. Rages, OCD, anxiety. He had a huge setback. His doctor put him back on rifampin, but it didn't help. So after 2 months, he changed rifampin to rifabutin. Now my son is much better, sleeping, no more rages, and OCD much better. But his mental clarity is very poor, and he can't focus and has mental confusion. He is on 150 milligram morning and 150 milligrams evening. He's also on doxy, azithromycin, malarone, glutathione, curcumin, doing sun and detox. What are your thoughts on getting his mental health improved? Thank you. So, as you know, and I think many people here know, Bartonella, we tend to think as being one of the infections that can trigger mental health issues, much like you've described with your son. So it's probable that Bartonella is part of this, okay? One thing, though, that you should be aware of is malarone. One of the components of malarone, called atovaquone, is a very fat-soluble medicine, and rarely I have seen it concentrate in people around the nerves in the brain and lead to confusion and lead to mental health changes. So if I was treating you, and you might want to bring this to the attention of your physician, you all might want to experiment with coming off of that malarone and looking for alternatives to treat the babesia. I can't tell for sure whether the malarone is part of the problem, but it might be, okay? Keep in mind, because it's a fat-soluble medicine, it can sometimes take a few weeks to get out of the brain, so you may not know right away, all right? So that would be one thing I might consider doing, especially since the only thing you really changed, he was doing really well, then you put him on malarone and he got worse, which could be side effect, or it could be Bartonella came back. He's doing better, back on a good Bartonella treatment, but he hasn't totally resolved. If he still is on malarone, it looks like he still is from what you're telling me here, I would consider making a change in that, okay? Now, in terms of babesia type treatments, there's, I guess, the two best categories we have for them. There's a group called the atovaquone based treatments, and there's a group called the quinoline based treatments. So atovaquone is the active part of malarone. It's also something found in Mepron. The quinolines, which are another way that you could look at going, use medicines called tefenaquine and something called primaquine. Those might be some medicines that your doctor might consider looking at as well, too, okay? I'll show you my article where you can take a look at that. You might print it off and bring it to your physician. Take a look at my Kills Babesia brief guide. And you're going to see my tier 1 treatments are the atovaquone based ones. Okay, so for instance, the malarone that you're on is an atovaquone. Okay. Then there's the quinoline based treatments, of which primaquine or tefenaquine are the cornerstones, and you combine them with some other medications. Okay. All right. All right. Good luck to you, Flaming. Good luck to your son. Hello, Joe. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. On December of 2017, I asked GP for Lyme test, and I think you're saying it was negative. 1121 LMD IGenex test showed positive results for Bartonella, babesia, and Lyme. Multiple months of antibiotics, cryptolepis, biocide LSF, currently on methylene blue, green dragon LB core, and oil of oregano. Your thoughts regarding direction. 2, what is the normal dosage and term of use for methylene blue? 3, options for combating sleep problems. 3 to 5 hours daily is what you're getting. 4, is constipation normal, side effect? Current symptoms are arthritis. occipital headaches, tiredness, and muscle pain. Thank you so much for your time and expertise, Joe in Virginia. Joe, as you can imagine, it's kind of hard for me to design a whole treatment for somebody and decide which is the best direction for you to take based on a brief paragraph like this. I'm not going to be able to do that. Okay, that's something I would have to have a long visit with you and kind of entertain where you've been and where things are going. All right. What I can say is that on your current regimen of methylene blue, the green dragon LB core, and the oregano, you've got good coverage for both Lyme and Bartonella out of that, and you've got good coverage for growing Lyme and growing Bartonella. I'm sorry, growing and persister Lyme, growing and persister Bartonella. So methylene blue is great to treat persister Lyme and growing Lyme, persister Bartonella, and growing Bartonella. The LB core has cat's claw in it. Cat's claw has been shown to treat persister Lyme. And I'm not remembering what else is in the LB core, but I know it's got some agents in it to treat Bartonella as well, too. I'm just not remembering off the top of my head, okay? Oregano is good for both growing and persister Lyme and Bartonella. So you've got your germs covered, all right? What is the normal dosage in terms of use for methylene blue? Most of us are using methylene blue as 50 milligrams 2 times a day. I use it as I do about any other antibiotic. I use it maybe up to about 6 months. I'm using it as long as I keep seeing benefits with it too. In terms of sleep, the herbs that I like to use, you could either go with prescription or herbal. For somebody that's having a hard time staying asleep predominantly, I like using a prescription medicine called trazodone. Trazodone is designed to be an antidepressant medicine, but is a good job of getting people into deep sleep and keeping them there. Okay, that's 25 to 50 milligrams 1 time a night. Herbs that you could look at using that sometimes help could be melatonin, anywhere from 3 to 6 milligrams. You could raise serotonin levels, and to do that, you would use 5-hydroxytryptophan, anywhere from 200 to 400 milligrams at night can sometimes be effective at getting people asleep and keeping them asleep. The other thing would be to look at sleep combination herbs that have valerian in them and have L-theanine in them. One such possibility could be a product by Karuna called the Sleep Formula. It has a number of herbs in it that can be helpful as well too. And then is constipation a normal side effect of what you're on? From what you've written down here, I don't tend to think of constipation being a normal side effect, okay? All right. Good luck to you, Joe. Hello, Rick. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Can COVID interfere with Lyme and Bart and make symptoms worse? So in my experience, I haven't seen COVID activate Lyme or activate Bartonella. But keep in mind, COVID triggers a cytokine excess syndrome. So it can make it look like your Lyme and your Bartonella are worse, because remember, most of their symptoms are related to excess cytokines as well too. Okay? Good luck to you, Rick. Hello, Cynthia. Let's see. I recently started disulfiram and Plaquenil for Lyme after trying pulsing a few antibiotics with no lasting improvement. Do you recommend pulsing these 2 meds as well, or just staying on them for a length of time? So disulfiram is extremely long acting. It has a long elimination half-life. It's fat soluble. So even if you're pulsing, the drug is still in you. So there's no benefit in doing a pulsing on that one. Plaquenil is not a most useful germ killer. It can help with a lot of the inflammation. Some of my colleagues use it to treat the cyst form of Lyme, but there's competing studies that show it may even lead to more cyst production. I tend not to use it as a germ killer, so I can't comment as to whether I think it's going to work in a pulsing way or not. But disulfiram, there's no reason to pulse it. It's a fat soluble medicine that can take weeks once it's in you to even get out of you. Okay, all right. Good luck to you. Hello, Maria. Say hi, Dr. Martin Ross. I've got Lyme disease, and a few days ago found out that I've got Chlamydia trachomatis, which I thought it was a sexual transmission disease. Can it be related to Borrelia? Thank you very much, and Happy New Year. So Chlamydia trachomatis usually is a sexually transmitted infection. It's quite common. I mean, it's because it can be a silent vaginal infection in many women. They just don't know they have it, or in men as well too. In terms of, have I ever seen it associated with Borrelia? No. When we think of chlamydia and Borrelia, we think of something called chlamydia pneumoniae, which is a common intracellular infection that exists in healthy people, but it may possibly get reactivated in somebody with Lyme. But I haven't seen that be the situation with Chlamydia trachomatis. I haven't seen any science that says it reactivates or that it is transmitted by a tick bite as well too. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Maria. Hello, Darlene. Let's see. I appreciate your knowledge. You're welcome. Let's see. What is your preferred method for tackling multiple infections? Babesia first, etc. Okay. So I always like to treat the Lyme infection and start treating by picking up one of the other co-infections. If I think somebody has anaplasma or Ehrlichia, when I'm choosing to treat Lyme, one of the Lyme agents I'm going to put them on is doxycycline, because 2 to 4 weeks of doxycycline will clear anaplasma and Ehrlichia. And so therefore, I don't consider them to be one of the additional co-infections I'm treating. I just know if I use doxycycline, I'm covered for them. Okay. So I would treat, okay, so that's that. So in terms of if I have a suspicion of Ehrlichia or anaplasma, as I treat for Lyme, I design my Lyme treatment so that it will take care of them. Okay. All right. By using doxycycline as my agent to treat intracellular Lyme and spirochete Lyme. In terms of Bartonella and Babesia, then, in general, I'm going to tend to go after Bartonella before Babesia, and I will treat Lyme and Bartonella at the same time. And as Bartonella starts getting better, then I will add in treatment for Babesia. The reason I do that is based on observation that Burrascano, who is one of the pioneers of Lyme treatment in this country, had, in that he observed in his practice out in Long Island that if people that he started to treat Babesia before getting Bartonella under control, that it became more difficult to get rid of the Bartonella. Okay. Now, occasionally I will do my Lyme and Babesia first if somebody has Babesia and hold off on the Bartonella. The only time I'm going to do that, though, is if they have raging Babesia symptoms and it is Babesia that's driving everything for them. In that case, I might go for Babesia first, along with Lyme at the same time. Okay? All right. I hope that answers your question. Good luck. Hello, Charles. Hello, Dr. Ross. Is MARCON something that must be addressed? Also, is stinging neck pain more likely to be mold or Lyme? So that quality of stinging is usually more of a neurologic issue, which could be triggered by mold, Lyme, or Bartonella. Any of those could do it, okay? And I don't know that one is more likely than another to cause it, okay? MARCON stands for methicillin-resistant coagulase negative staph. That's a mouthful, isn't it? All right, so MARCONS is this condition that was contrived by Dr. Richie Shoemaker. Dr. Richie Shoemaker is the physician that first came up with the idea that there is something called mold toxicity, and he developed a whole elaborate science around it, showing that there's a genetic profile that 25% of us have, making us susceptible to mold toxicity. And he also was able to show that a number of inflammatory blood tests would be out of line if you have mold toxicity. And then he labeled the condition that remains once you get rid of mold. If you're still sick, he calls it chronic inflammatory response syndrome. And he started looking for other reasons you might stay chronically inflamed. So in his protocol, his first step was get all the inflammation out by removing mold. He doesn't test for mold in you. He doesn't believe in doing urine testing. He just relies on how a person is feeling and whether the inflammatory marker testing gets better. So whether they're VEGF, their C4A, C3A, their TGF beta 1 testing, those are testing he would do. If they get better, then he thinks that that's proof that mold is gone without really proving mold is gone. Okay, all right. In other words, he doesn't measure mold in a person the way that most of us that manage Lyme disease actually do. Now, in his protocol, he would have you remove mold toxins first. And if you remove them, but you still remained inflamed, now he would do maybe a month or two of binders. And if you're not better, he would say there must be something else triggering all that inflammation. He then would go ahead and do a nose swab to see if you have this infection called MARCONS in your nose. And if he found it there, he thought that MARCONS must be the thing that's triggering all your inflammation. And so he advocating putting people on antibiotic pills and antibiotic nose spray to get rid of that MARCONS. I followed his protocol at one time, and I never found any difference clearing MARCONS. Never. I never saw that it made a difference. In addition, it tends to come back easily. It's practically dang near impossible to get rid of and keep going. Okay. Because I never saw benefit in how somebody was doing once it was gone, and I didn't see really any worsening when it came back, I tend to think it's not a problem. I think what he has identified is a common germ that can live in the noses of people, healthy and non-healthy. And he's decided to treat it, but I don't find any science that proves it's actually a problem. And then again, the other point I want to make on it is you can't get rid of this stuff. I mean, you can clear it temporarily, but it won't stay gone. So I don't bother with it. I don't think it leads to a problem. And also, you can't get rid of it anyhow. Okay? All right. I'm not alone in that. Dr. Neil Nathan, who writes a lot about mold toxicity, also, he and I have had conversations about it. He doesn't go after MARCONS anymore either. Okay? All right. Thanks for the question, Charles. All right, everyone. That's it for me tonight. I got to take care of my throat and all my coughing here. Boy, it wasn't doing so badly today, but the more I've been involved in talking, it just seems to be, I'm irritated there. From what I'm understanding of this virus that I got 3 weeks ago is that even after you're not infectious and you're feeling better, this crud still goes on for about 3 to 4 weeks. So I'm hoping that that by the next time we visit, I'm not going to be coughing all over you again. So thanks for bearing with that tonight. I hope you still got a lot of useful information out of the webinar this evening. Keep a lookout in your email tomorrow morning, somewhere between 9 and 9:30 a.m. Before that time, you should receive an email from me announcing that the recording is ready for you to view. Tonight, I have to do some brief edits to it to get it ready, and then I'll create a synopsis of it so that you'll know what's in that webinar. When I send you that email tomorrow morning, there'll be a sign-up link for next week's webinar. I hope you'll join me for that too. And then I have one big ask for you. I ask you to share this email I send out tomorrow morning with anyone that has Lyme disease or mold toxicity that you think might benefit from the information that I share here, or future webinars as well too. My goal is to help as many people as possible with this illness, and I rely on you guys to help me do that. All right. So please share my emails. I would appreciate if you do that. All right. Good night, everyone. I had a good time being with you here tonight, in between my coffee. And I look forward to seeing you next week as well. Okay. Bye-bye.